Like and subscribe. Written by J. Bell. Narrated by Kevin R. Free at Brickshop Audio, Inc. Someday, I'm going to marry you. Evan said these words with just enough humor to not sound completely crazy, and yet he also tried to give them weight. Such a promise was serious and could change the course of his entire life. Assuming the other person was willing. So far, so good. Tony's smile didn't falter or fade. Those white teeth were still showing, each perfectly straight and flawless, as if treated to a manicure every day. The hazel green eyes remained shining, one eyebrow cocked in mild amusement. The thick hair was perfect. Not sculpted or gelled, but loose and natural, as if Tony had simply been born with the perfect style. The fold in the cheek caused by the slightly lopsided smile, the stubble on the strong jaw, the dimple in his chin. Oh, yes, Evan wanted to marry Tony more than anything. He pushed against the arms of his seat, the chair creaking as he peeked over the cubicle wall. Nearly quitting time on a Friday. Most people had ducked out early. Evan was mostly alone, thank goodness, which meant no one had overheard him. Lowering himself again, he considered the autographed headshot, examining the looping black marker in one corner that spelled out Tony Taylor. Then his fantasy resumed. "What's that?" Evan breathed. "All this talk of marriage is too soon? You want to try before you buy? Very well." He stared half-lidded at those handsome features a moment. Then he brought the photo close and pressed his lips to Tony's. After a moment, that felt more awkward than romantic. Evan set down the photo and sighed, but not in satisfaction. Could he be more pathetic? Talking to a photo, nearly proposing, and then kissing it? No, it didn't get much lower than that. But Evan didn't blush or chastise himself. Desperation was an old acquaintance, the kind he could share a comfortable silence with. Besides, his infatuation with Tony was hardly new. For most people, Tony Taylor was an online persona and nothing more. Admittedly, Evan's obsession had started the way it did for the other 500,000 subscribers. He discovered one of Tony's videos on YouTube, lured in by the little thumbnail image of a searing hot guy without his shirt on. Clicking increased the size of the image and brought it to life. Nice big pecs, meaty shoulders, and mouth-watering stomach muscles. Evan hadn't heard anything Tony had to say for the first few minutes. The words spilling out of those delicious lips were gibberish as Evan's brain bowed to his libido and left the room. When his thought processes finally returned, he became twice as fascinated because he knew this man, for real. This was no delusion or instant crush. Tony Taylor had once been known as Anthony Taylor, and nearly 5 years ago, he and Evan had been in high school together. Of course, that was the full extent of their association. Anthony had been one of the many guys Evan would gaze at longingly, usually out of the corner of his eye, or while in a crowd where he was less likely to be noticed. They had even shared a class together. Sophomore year biology. Anthony had been cute back then, always hanging out with a small group of friends who seemed like trouble. Once he had shaved half his head, letting the other side remain long, and for a brief phase, he wore a fake lip piercing. Cute. But Anthony the man, now Tony Taylor, wasn't cute. He was stunning, handsome, manly, studly. Oh! Evan shook his head and put the autograph photo back in the mailing envelope. Some deluded part of him had hoped Tony would recognize his name from high school and include a personal note. Maybe an invitation to dinner. He hadn't. Evan tried to feel relieved about this. Sometimes his obsession with Tony was an annoyance. Countless times he had unsubscribed from his channel, only to return, weak and curious, a few days later. After catching up with what he had missed, Evan would watch the video, the one that proved Tony was much more than a pretty face. Then he would give in and subscribe again. Free time and the internet. Never a good combination. Evan shook his head to clear it of pretty images and silly fantasies. Then he stood, put on his coat, and walked out of the office, considering the weekend ahead. Halloween! Not only was it on a Saturday this year, meaning he could get wasted without worrying about having to work the next day, but he also had an invitation to one of the best parties in the Kansas City area. A huge house, tons of gay guys wearing all sorts of costumes, both funny and suggestive, and his best friend on his arm, doing shot after shot until they couldn't see straight. Evan smiled on the way to his car, a happy feeling keeping him warm on the drive home. When he trotted up the apartment steps, the door swung open before he could extend his keys. "I found the wig!" Julie exclaimed, holding in one hand what looked like roadkill. "Is that a skunk?" Evan asked as he pushed past her. No," Julie said patiently. "It's my hair. For tomorrow." Evan tossed his things on the coffee table, plopped down on the couch, and started taking off his shoes. "I thought you were avoiding the Bride of Frankenstein look." "I am," Julie said, standing across from him, "which is why I took the wig to a hairstylist to have it cut." "Seriously?" Instead of answering, Julie demonstrated, pulling the wig over her pixie hair. In fact, pixie was a good word to describe all of her. She was small and slight with fine features and was more animated than a Disney movie. Like now. Getting the wig on apparently involved her grunting, shaking her hips, and hopping around on one foot. When she was done, she tousled her fake hair and beamed at him. The style wasn't so different than her usual. Instead of blonde, the wig was black, but it was still cut short and swept forward. Strands of white ran through the hair, as if Julie had seen more than her share of hard times. "You look crazy," Evan said. "I know," Julie exclaimed. "Isn't it great?" "Totally. I still think you should drool occasionally, like you've been given a lobotomy." Julie winced. "Yuck." "But maybe. Oh, and I also found this for you." She dug into a plastic bag sitting on the carpet and tossed him a headband with a silver plastic disc attached. Evan caught it. He'd only seen doctors wear such gear in cartoons or mad scientist movies, but his costume needed it to instantly communicate their chosen theme: doctor and patient. Not the most original idea, but it would allow them a lot of fun role-playing. "Excited?" Julie asked, pulling off the wig and dropping it into the bag. "Yeah, me too." She pointed to the coffee table. "What's that?" Evan's eyes drifted to the mailing envelope with the autographed photo inside before he felt a jolt of panic. Julie must have noticed because she lunged to grab the envelope 1 second before he did. She was quicker. Evan groaned and leaned back, watching as she pulled out the photo. Her amusement faded when she saw what it was. "Tony?" she said. "Again?" "What?" Evan responded, feeling defensive. "You paid money for an autograph." "And a photo," Evan said. "That's a quality print right there. I'm supporting the arts." "The arts? The guy is eye candy. People watch him because he's hot. That's it." "Not true," Evan said. "He has a good heart. Remember the video I showed you where he went to the animal shelter to pick out a dog? He chose one missing a leg. Think about it. He didn't go for a puppy or something vain like a Siberian husky." "My parents have a husky." "You know what I mean," Evan said. "All most people want is something pretty." "That's exactly my point." Julie pushed the photo back in the envelope. "You're better than this. There's someone out there for you, someone real, but you need to go find him. Sitting at home and watching some guy's YouTube videos isn't going to help." "He's not just some guy," Evan protested. I know, he went to your high school, our high school, but that's it. I don't think he ever noticed you." "Of course he didn't. I was fat, had no sense of style, and probably smelled like Doritos." Julie shook her head. "You were adorably chubby, a nonconformist when it came to fashion, and you smelled just fine." "As my best friend, you're required to say that." "As your best friend back then and now, I'm the most qualified to judge. You were awesome then, and today—" She gestured at him. Evan had hit a late growth spurt. Shooting up to 6 feet had done wonders for his weight. Exercise had taken care of the rest. He wasn't muscular or model magazine material, but he was in decent shape. He let Julie pick out most of his clothes, borrowing her sense of style. His hair had more of a shine and his skin less of a sheen, probably because he ate healthier and tried to get regular sun. A coworker had recently insisted he bore a passing resemblance to Ryan Reynolds, even though she probably only meant his brown hair and eyes. These days, Evan mostly felt good about himself, but sometimes he felt marked by his past. Once a loser, always a loser. "You're awesome," Julie repeated. "Any guy would be lucky to have you. Any girl, too. I can think of one in particular." Evan swallowed and looked away, ignoring the flirtation. "Maybe I'll meet someone tomorrow." "Maybe." Julie tossed the envelope on the table. "Just promise me you'll leave Tony at home." They made dinner together after that, which they ate while watching a horror movie to get themselves in the Halloween spirit. Afterwards, Julie started yawning. When she finally retired for the night, he went to his room and booted up the computer. While the hard drive was chugging, he took Tony's photo out of the envelope. He stared at the signature, at the way each O had a little slash through it, and wondered if Tony had artistic inclinations. Once the computer was ready, Evan put on his headphones, went to YouTube, and checked his subscriptions. Sure enough, there was a new video, this one Halloween-themed. Tony was shirtless, again, his muscles bulging with each gesture. The hotness of this was somewhat hampered by the Minotaur mask hiding his face. Tony kept referring to it as a bull mask, but the human body below the neck made it mythological. "So, what do you think of my costume?" Tony's muffled voice asked. "Think it's a bunch of bullshit?" The joke was stupid, but Evan laughed anyway. "You look great," he murmured in response. Tony pulled off the mask and grinned. "Tune in tomorrow to see what my boyfriend will be wearing. There's a theme. Can you guess what it is? Let me know in the comments, and as always, like and subscribe." Evan frowned. Normally he left a comment, but the mention of Tony's boyfriend made him unhappy. He wasn't jealous or anything, but it did interfere with the fantasy and reminded him of how lonely he was. Julie was an awesome friend, but there were some things she simply couldn't provide. Not wanting to end the night on a low note, Evan clicked a few times, pulling up a bookmark to his favorite video. Tony, when he was just starting out. The video was 4 years old. Tony's hair was longer and he still had his shirt on. This video wasn't full of grinning or casual flexing. Instead, Tony was slumped in his chair somewhat, eyes focused off-screen as he rambled. "So, I don't know what to do. People say it takes two to love, but that's not true. I feel love inside of me sometimes, like this force, this energy that keeps building up. I see hot guys at the mall, and they're only interested in my sister. That sucks because it would be so cool to fall in love. Sometimes all this need is overwhelming, like I feel it'll rip my chest apart. Can you get a broken heart without being with someone? Can wanting to fall in love so bad make that happen?" For 9 seconds, the video went on in silence as Tony chewed his bottom lip and stared into space. Evan paused it there, just before Tony resumed speaking, and examined the vulnerability on his face. Evan was lonely, but the guy on the screen had been too. Tony had found someone, and now he was bouncy, cocky, and invincible. Evan sighed, clicked the little X in the corner, and decided to call it a night. As he struggled to find sleep, he tried to picture a future version of himself that was also invigorated by love. Try as he might, he just couldn't. A new day, a new start. Evan left the computer off, which took some willpower considering what a hopeless internet addict he was. Working as an IT technician didn't help either. Some days his life felt a little too virtual, so he tried to dedicate weekends to getting back in touch with the real world. In the morning, he cleaned the apartment. Then he went for a light jog that was more like a brisk walk. Afterwards, he sat around, flipped through one of Julie's fashion magazines, and eventually dozed off while watching old sci-fi reruns on TV. In the afternoon, he made an emergency run to pick up Halloween candy, grabbing takeout on the way back and sharing a meal with Julie. Then he took a shower before putting on his costume. Choosing a mundane costume this year was no accident. The year before, he and Julie had dressed up as zombies, and while they'd had fun shuffling around at the party, being a living corpse wasn't exactly attractive. No sex appeal, no phone numbers. This year, Evan decided to wear something with a seductive edge. A doctor seemed a good choice, since the profession had positive associations with money and success, not to mention the whole playing doctor angle. The costume consisted of blue scrubs, a white overcoat, a stethoscope, and, of course, the weird head mirror. He even printed out a fake ID card with his name and photo, making it look like he worked at the local hospital. This he pinned to his lab coat. "Looking good, Dr. Hanson," Julie breathed when he entered the living room. "I think it's time for my physical." "In my professional opinion," Evan said, walking a circle around her while rubbing his chin, "you're undeniably crazy, incurably insane, and way beyond the help of modern medicine." She looked it, too. Julie was wearing a skimpy pale blue gown, which she'd casually cinched a few places to make more form-fitting and sexy. This was countered by a number of disturbing stains. The fright wig had been a good call, but Evan's favorite detail was the lipstick that cut a line across her cheek to her lunatic grin. So creepy. She shook a bottle of pills at him, demanding a refill and chasing him around the living room. "I can't help you," Evan hollered. "I don't have a prescription pad." "What kind of doctor are you?" Julie raved. "I need my meds, and shock therapy, and maybe an enema." "Gross." Julie shoved him on the couch, then had a relapse to last year's zombie persona and tried to eat his brains. Just as it seemed Evan was doomed, the doorbell came to his rescue. Julie got up to answer it, a chorus of "trick or treat" preceding her, praising the different costumes. When candy had been dispensed and the door was shut again, Julie turned around. She wasn't smiling. Instead, she eyed him before heading to the couch. "What's wrong?" he asked, scooting over to make room. "This isn't working," Julie said as she sat down. Evan struggled to understand what she meant. "You're thinking the nurse idea was better? It's not too late. We can run to—" "You and me." Julie gestured between them. "It's not working." "You're breaking up with me?" Evan said, trying to make light of the situation. "I wish," Julie admitted. "At least that would mean we'd been together." Evan sighed. Not this again. "If I could be with you." "You would in a heartbeat, I know. I don't want to drag us down that tired old road again. I've gotten over you as much as I can, but I feel like we're still holding each other back." "I love living with you," Evan said, fearing the worst. Julie smiled. "I love it too. I don't want that to change. Tonight is the problem. We'll go to the party, and you'll hide behind me anytime some hot guy looks your way, and I'll be holding on to your arm, making them think you're the only straight guy there, because part of me doesn't want you to find someone. Most of me does, because I love you, but I also want you to stay single, because I love you." "I know," Evan said. He thought it over and sighed. "What's the alternative?" "You go to your party and let all those gay guys see a cute man on his own. I don't think you'll be lonely for long." "And you?" Julie exhaled. "It's time for me to rejoin my people. There's this new kind of bar out there where the boys like girls." "No." "It's true. I'm going to try my luck there." Evan looked her over. "Now I wish we had gone with the sexy nurse idea." Julie grinned. "Then again, any interested guy will know up front that I'm crazy." "Are you sure about this? Maybe we're putting too much emphasis on relationships. Who cares if we stay single, right? All that matters is that we're happy. You ordered an autographed photo of a YouTube star, Julie deadpanned, and I felt jealous over that photo. If we're going to get tangled up in a love triangle, it would be nice if the third person was real and not a piece of paper. A high-gloss piece of paper, Evan said. Then he nodded. You're right. Okay. Tonight we fly solo and try our luck. If it doesn't work out, I already put 2 tubs of ice cream in the fridge. Deal, Evan said. It's either true love tonight or double fudge ice cream in the morning. Julie considered this and shrugged. Or maybe both. Evan smiled in return. Both it is. A very large house or a small mansion? Evan couldn't quite decide. Regardless of which description fit best, the home was exceptional. In addition to 3 stories filled with sprawling bedrooms, gleaming bathrooms, and walk-in closets bigger than his apartment, the home also boasted its own small movie theater and had a number of curious touches, like the fireman's pole that ended in the kitchen or the lake out back with its own paddle boats. Evan didn't know much about the owner. A dead-end date had brought him here the first time. He'd been introduced to an older man and his much younger boyfriend, but hadn't talked much with either. When he spotted the guest list sitting open on the kitchen table, he'd added his name and contact info. Ever since then, he'd been invited to the occasional party. Remaining anonymous at such events was easy, since the large rooms were packed with all sorts of people. Julie was right. Normally they interacted briefly with a few of the other guests, but mostly they stayed together having fun in a new environment. Without her to talk to, Evan was forced to mingle. The night had a promising start when a hot guy dressed as a Civil War soldier started chatting with him. After a while, Evan realized he was talking to a lesbian. Maybe it was the fake beard that threw him off, or the way some women could resemble spunky young men when they wanted to. Regardless of gender, she was hot, and obviously not interested in him. Her girlfriend was very nice, though. Later, an older man spent some time with him. As it turned out, he was a real doctor, or had been before retiring. He teased Evan about the inaccuracies in his costume before he seemed to forget they weren't colleagues and started talking shop. After suffering lecture after lecture about healthcare, patient confidentiality, and a few mysterious infections never successfully diagnosed, Evan excused himself. He began missing Julie. The party was in full swing now, and everyone seemed to have paired up. A few guys caught Evan's eye, but observing each revealed they were already taken. After wandering some more, he found a nice wall to lean against and contented himself with people watching. Now those are some tits! Evan rolled his eyes, trying to ignore the loud voices next to him. The 2 guys had been giggling and acting up for the last 20 minutes. Now he knew why people sometimes looked irritated when he and Julie got hyper together. Fun for them, but annoying for everyone else. A guy could fuck tits like that, the voice continued. I never understood why breeders are so into that, but I think I get it now. Just be careful, girl didn't shave her chest. How retrosexual. Friction burns, ow! I'd still hump those pecs, though. Evan's curiosity got the better of him and he glanced over. The 2 guys were young, probably fresh out of high school, and were passing a phone back and forth. One noticed him looking and turned the screen so he could see. What do you think? The guy asked. Would you wax him first or just go to town? Evan's answer caught in his throat. On the small phone screen, Tony Taylor was having a frank and shirtless conversation with the camera. His hair was slicked back and wet, which signified the infamous swimming pool video. Look at him! He's practically drooling. Can you blame him? What about you? The phone was shown to someone else, the topic of sex always luring in innocent bystanders. It's not his chest I'd be interested in, said the new guy. You want to get between his cheeks? Asked the phone owner. I bet you could. Manly men like him are always bottoms. They look so butch out in public, but then you get them home and it's all, fuck me, please, fuck me. I bet you're right, said the newcomer. Let me see, another voice said. I can always tell. He is. Power bottom. I bet he can't get enough. He's not a piece of meat, Evan snarled, his voice surprisingly loud. Then quieter, he added, he's not a bottom either. The guy holding the phone glared at him. How would you know? Because of Tony's very frank video where he discussed the topic. But Evan wasn't about to declare he was a fan, not with so many heads turned in his direction. Because I know him, he said. We went to high school together. Now the guys with the phone looked more interested. And how do you know he's a top? Did you sleep with him? No, Evan said, hesitating. He talked about it once, that's all. Two pairs of lips pursed at him. Whatever, she's full of shit. He's right. A new voice said, Tony is a top. Evan turned to see someone dressed as a matador. Behind the black mask, the blue eyes were strangely familiar, as were the slightly downturned lips. Present your evidence, snapped the guy with the phone. Evan watched in fascination as the matador walked up, took the cell phone, and tapped on the screen a few times. Then he handed it back. I know because he's my boyfriend. The two guys stared open-mouthed at the screen, but Evan didn't need to see it to understand. Tony's boyfriend was in the swimming pool video too, toward the end. Evan often stopped the video before their on-screen kiss, but he'd seen enough to know the matador was telling the truth. He was Tony's boyfriend. His stupid, luckier than anyone should be boyfriend. The matador turned toward Evan, red cape rustling behind him. He's here. If you really know Tony, you should come say hello. A challenge. Evan felt sure that's what this was. If you really know Tony, which you probably don't, then prove it. Come talk to the legend himself. If it weren't for the skeptical eyes around him, Evan would have declined. Instead, he shrugged as if it didn't matter to him either way. Yeah, okay, why not? As he followed the matador through the crowd, Evan found numerous answers to that question. Why not? Because Tony wouldn't have a clue who he was? Because Evan would be humiliated? And because he was supposed to be here tonight to move on from his unhealthy obsession instead of chasing after it? The real party is upstairs, his guide said, bringing them to a stop before the first step. You really went to school with Tony? Yes, Evan snapped. We were in high school together. Maybe he was being a little deceptive about actually knowing Tony, but they were in the same class. Why did people find that so hard to believe? Did they think people like Tony went to special schools populated only by supermodels? Oh, okay. My name is Orlando. Like the elf? Evan was well aware of his name, but felt it best to feign ignorance. Plus, the light jab made him feel better. You're thinking of Orlando Bloom. I'm Orlando Logan, but I'm glad you think we look alike. That's not what Evan meant at all, but before he could set the record straight, the matador was moving up the stairs with elf-like agility. On the second floor, they pushed past more people to a door that was closed but unlocked. Another stairwell awaited them, and as they climbed upward, the noise of the party fell away. This was bad, definitely bad. What were people doing up here? Lines of cocaine? Having an orgy? He was braced for anything when they entered a dimly lit room. What he didn't expect to see was the owner of the house sitting on a couch and snacking on cookies while his boyfriend snuggled up against him and took a nap. Around them, other guests sat in comfortable chairs and conversed while light music played from a flat stereo system on the wall. Aside from drinks and a few cigarettes, nothing wild seemed to be happening here. Evan's relief was short-lived because there he was. Standing in the center of the room and holding court with a circle of young guys was Tony. Or a minotaur, since he still wore his bull mask, lifting it occasionally to take a sip of beer. He probably won't recognize me, Evan mumbled. It really was a long time ago. Want to go back downstairs? Orlando asked. No, Evan said. "I'm not lying." Orlando held up his hands. "I didn't say you were." "It felt like you were." Evan met his eyes, which were hard to read. The blue of his irises were made more intense by the black fabric surrounding them. What sort of matador wore a mask anyway? "Let's go jog his memory," Orlando said. "I'm sure he'll remember you." Evan nodded, swallowing against a dry throat. Orlando led the way, walking up to Tony with enviable ease and touching his arm to get his attention. "Tony, I met an old friend of yours from high school." "Ugh. Take off that stupid mask for 5 seconds, okay?" Evan stared as he did so. Had he ever been this close to Tony before? Maybe when leaving biology class, but Evan had been careful to keep his distance from hot guys back then. He hadn't wanted anyone to figure out the truth, never choosing someone like Tony for his study partner. Still, he was sure Tony hadn't been this hot back then. The slightly hairy chest, the dark hair under each armpit as the mask was pulled off, the way his arms flexed with each motion. And once that face was free, well, the photo was definitely a poor representation of the real deal. Evan breathed in, amazed at how good Tony smelled. That had to be more than just cologne. Evan had spent enough time sniffing bottles in department stores to know they didn't sell such a fragrance. Maybe part of the scent was cologne, but the rest was what? Tony sweat? The man himself was looking Evan over, sizing him up. Before he had a chance to admit he had no clue who Evan was, he tried to instill doubt. "Hello, Anthony," he said. "It's been a long time since biology class." Tony hesitated, looked him over one more time, eyes taking their time as they moved over his crotch. That was awkward. Or exciting. Maybe that's what alpha dogs did. Eventually, those hazel green eyes moved upward again to his fake hospital identification. His lips practically moved as he read it. Finally, he made eye contact and smiled. "Hey, if it isn't Evan Hansen, man, I barely recognized you." Evan breathed out in relief. "Same here. Of course, the bull mask probably had something to do with that." Tony barked laughter, the groupies around him following suit a moment later. "So, Evan, you want a beer?" "Yeah, thanks." Evan had already drank one and was now abstaining so he could drive himself home, but holding a bottle would make him feel more natural, more secure. Tony gestured, one of his boys rushing off to fetch the drink. Orlando didn't hide his irritation at this, but turned his attention to other matters. "Evan Hansen here," he paused, looking puzzled before continuing, "was just defending your honor downstairs." "Oh, really?" Tony asked, seeming genuinely interested. Evan nodded. "A couple of guys were talking about doing unspeakable things to you, and a bunch of others were getting a little too excited. It's a good thing you're up here where it's safe, or you might have been mobbed." "I'm used to it," Tony said. "So, what have you been up to since school?" "Computers," Evan answered. Glorified tech support, really, but simply saying computers left so much to the imagination. Remaining vague meant he could be a software developer or something impressive like that. "What about you?" "Computers," Tony said with a smile. Exactly. Not that Tony had anything to be ashamed of. All those YouTube advertisement royalties must add up quickly. He probably raked in the cash, not to mention the extra earnings from selling autographs to desperate fans. Of course, now Evan's obsession could come in handy. He already knew so much about Tony. All he had to do was draw attention to what they had in common. "I like the bull mask," Evan said. "Reminds me of the Ifrit summon in Final Fantasy." He made sure to look embarrassed and even thought he felt his cheeks flush. "You know, the big guy with the horns?" No one knows what I'm talking about, do they? "I do," Tony said. "I'm an old school gamer, and I love the Final Fantasy series." "That can't be true." Evan shook his head. "A guy like you doesn't play video games. If you did, you'd have a keg instead of a six-pack." Tony beamed at the compliment. "What's your excuse then, doctor?" You're looking pretty tight beneath those scrubs. Oh, this was too good. The stuff of wet dreams. If a small crowd wasn't around them, Evan would be in seventh heaven, or in Tony's arms. As it was, he was attracting quite a few envious, if not downright aggressive stares. The worst was coming from Tony's boyfriend, whose narrowed eyes kept darting down to Evan's name tag. Hanson, Orlando said, frown deepening. Evan Hanson, you're a fan. Evan blanched. What? I recognize your name from the autographed photos we sent out recently. Your address was the only one in the area. Orlando snapped his fingers. I even joked about saving a stamp and delivering the photo in person. Remember that? I do, Tony said, looking to Evan. You're a fan of mine. Of course he is. How else would he know who you are? Do you think it's a complete coincidence that he started talking about one of your favorite video games? Orlando turned to face Evan. And for the record, the reason he's in such good shape is because I drag his ass away from his gaming marathons and make sure he hits the gym with me. And the only thing that looks tight on you, fanboy, is your bulge. I hate to think why. Evan's cheeks really were flushing now. Those envious expressions had become amused sneers. In the space of a few moments, he'd gone from feeling totally high to completely humiliated. That's what he got for playing with the big boys. We really did go to high school together, Evan mumbled. Then he dropped his eyes to the floor and instinctually walked toward open air. He wanted to get away from them, from the house entirely. He made it outside, but unfortunately he was only on a large balcony. He walked to its edge, wishing he could fly, and considered jumping. He wouldn't, of course. It's not like this was the first time he'd embarrassed himself. Evan breathed out, his breath a puff of steam in the cool air. He noticed the revelers in the yard below and the jumbled mess of parked cars. Then he gazed over the hills of silhouetted trees, wishing he could disappear into their dark and quiet comfort. So you're really a fan of mine, huh? Evan spun around, back to the wooden banister. Tony stood there, wearing a lopsided grin. It's okay, he said. I love my fans. I always say that in my videos, and I mean it. I think it's cool that you're here. I didn't know you'd be at this party, Evan said defensively. I'm not a creepy stalker or anything. It's a complete coincidence. Too bad, Tony said, moving closer. I've always wanted my own stalker. All that obsession, need, and dedication. It would be a big-ass compliment, really. Evan fought back a smile. Sorry to disappoint, he said. I'm barely even a fan. I only bought the autograph because I worried you'd starve without my money. It's a good thing you did. Tony scratched his abs. I'm always hungry these days. Know what I mean? Evan shook his head. Nope. Tony laughed. You're fun. Come back to the party. Have that beer with me. I don't think your boyfriend would like that. Him? Orlando's just overprotective, that's all. He understands my needs. Evan found this confusing. Did they have an open relationship? Tony had a video about commitment, and he'd preached the importance of monogamy. Was it possible to have an open relationship and still be committed? Or maybe Evan was misinterpreting the statement entirely. I'd rather stay out here, he said. The cool air feels good. It does, Tony said, although my nipples are saying it's a little cold. Look at them. They're like two little rockets. Evan didn't glance down, but he did laugh. Tony grinned in response. That's better. I'd hate if one of my fans had a bad Halloween, especially if it was sort of my fault. It's not your fault, Evan insisted, and I'm enjoying myself. Especially now. Me too. Tony glanced over his shoulder, then back again. You know, they have paddle boats out back. Maybe you should slip down to the dock and I'll meet you in 5. No way could that be misinterpreted. Evan felt torn. Part of him, a very specific part, felt excited about the idea of slipping away somewhere with Tony for a little starlit romance. But the rest of Evan felt uneasy. As much as he tried to ignore Orlando's cameos in Tony's videos, he was undeniably a part of his life, wasn't he? Or maybe Orlando was just an emotional cameo as well. Maybe Tony was still trying to find the right person to give all that love to. Evan stood on his tippy toes to see over Tony's shoulder. In the doorway, framed in a rectangle of warm light, was Orlando. He was just waiting there, arms crossed over his chest, as if curious what would happen. "I think I'm going to call it a night," Evan said. "It's been a long day, and I'm really tired." Tony glanced over his shoulder, his expression understanding. "Maybe you're right." "It was nice talking with you," Evan said. "Don't let this go to your head, but your videos are awesome. There's a reason you have so many subscribers, and it's not just because you go shirtless so often." Tony's eyes shined at the compliment. "Don't be a stranger." Then he clapped a hand on Evan's shoulder. It felt warm and strong. "Hey, tell me your username so I can recognize you." "Man Curious," Evan said. God, that sounds dumb when I say it out loud. It's supposed to be a joke. Realization dawned on Tony's features. "I get it. Okay then, Boy Wonder. I'll see you around. Say hi to Batman for me." "Will do," Evan said. He kept his gaze averted as he reached the doorway. Orlando stepped aside to let him pass, the red matador cape catching Evan's eye. Should he turn around and charge? Knock his opponent off the balcony and claim Tony for his own? He was tempted, mostly because he was so tired of not getting what he wanted, his own great love. Maybe he had come close tonight. All the way down the stairs, he wondered if he'd blown his big chance. Once outside, Evan walked around the back of the house and down a hill slick with wet grass. When he reached the paddleboat dock, he refused to look back, to betray the hope burning inside his chest. Instead, he glanced up at the stars and waited for them to grant his wish. When they didn't, when his body grew so cold that he started shivering, Evan sighed, walked back to his car, and drove away. "So, let me get this straight," Julie said. She was sitting on the living room couch, wearing a pair of sunglasses, despite the curtains being pulled shut against the morning. A greasy paper bag sat on the coffee table, now devoid of the French fries she had sent Evan out for. "You meet the guy of your dreams, the one who's supposed to be totally out of your reach. You finally meet him and he hits on you. And your response is to run away?" Evan considered this. "Yup, that's the gist of it." Julie nodded, then winced and rubbed her temples. "God, I wish I had done the same." Evan didn't hide his puzzlement. "The guy you went home with was hot, right?" "He was, but there are things I haven't told you yet." "Like?" "He has a fetish. A kink." Evan smiled. "Leather?" "Worse." "Diapers? Did he call you mommy?" Julie sighed. "No. He's a furry." "Wait, you mean the guy had a hairy back or a furry? The people who like dressing up in animal costumes." "Don't laugh. I can't help it. So what was he? A skunk? A horse? Or maybe a little piggy?" Julie threw a crumpled up napkin at him. "A panther. And it wasn't so weird at the bar. I mean, it was Halloween. So I figured he just had a really amazing costume. He took the head off while we were drinking, so I knew he was handsome. I could tell he had a nice body, too. But when we got home, the costume wasn't coming off." "Then how did you—" "A little flap in the front." Evan rolled over laughing and clutching at his stomach. "Oh my God, that is too good." Julie shook her head. "You don't know the half of it." "There's more?" "Well, he owns a lot of costumes. Not all of them for men." Evan's jaw dropped. "You dressed up too?" Julie nodded. Evan put on a sober expression. Don't make me guess. I was a squirrel. He tried not to laugh again. He really did, but a snort escaped before he got himself under control. A panther having sex with a squirrel. Is that even possible? We managed, Julie said, and from what I remember, it was pretty damn hot. Wow. Yep. Are you going to call him again? Julie peered at him from over her sunglasses. Are you turning straight anytime soon? Nope. She sighed. Yeah, I might call him. He was really nice, and if costumes don't have to be involved every single time. I don't know. Am I crazy? Evan shook his head. We're all freaks in our own way. He has a really great sense of humor. I imagine he'd have to, Evan said, fighting down a grin. Listen, finding a nice guy is even harder than finding a normal one. I say go for it. Julie nodded and stood. I'm going to sleep this one off. What about you? I'm up for the day. I'll try not to be loud. This involved returning to his room, sitting in front of the computer and putting on his headphones. The site he chose to browse was the most obvious. Meeting Tony only made his videos more appealing. As Evan watched them, he compared what he'd learned in real life to what he saw on screen. Now he could imagine what Tony smelled like, or picture the parts of his body the camera didn't capture. What he really wanted was to re-watch the video about commitment, but he was having trouble finding it. Evan was clicking through menus, checking if he'd added the video to a playlist, when he noticed a message in his inbox. That was unusual. He literally gasped when he saw who it was from, making him very glad no witnesses were around. His hand was barely steady enough to double-click the subject, which simply read, Hey. The opening line began that way, too. Hey, Boy Wonder. I feel bad about last night. I'd had a few too many and feel like you might have gotten the wrong impression. I'd like to make it up to you. Lunch today at 1 p.m.? Meet me at my place. The address is below. XX. Tony. Evan glanced at the clock. It was nearly noon now. Talk about short notice. Without thinking, he rattled off a simple reply that said he'd be there. Once in the shower, he grinned. Tony was tipsy or drunk last night. Who wasn't a horn dog after a few beers? Intoxication also made it easier to admit when you were attracted to someone. This changed everything. Tony was into him, and it was obvious his relationship with Orlando was on the rocks. Now they would have a much more civil lunch, where Tony would no doubt pour out his heart to Evan. After that, anything was possible. The address scrawled on the piece of paper in his pocket made Evan feel special, like he had access to a celebrity. That's what Tony was, really. 500,000 people subscribed to his channel. Not everyone had an account to log in with, so no doubt others were tuning in too, or had at least seen some of Tony's videos. His fan base must be huge. How many of those viewers wished they were in Evan's shoes right now? If only they knew. He didn't know what to expect when driving into Kansas City. A sprawling rooftop condo, or maybe $1 million house. Evan was surprised, then, when his journey ended in front of a rather drab apartment building. The architecture was decades older than anything in the suburbs, lending it a sort of charm, but somehow he had expected more. Evan walked to the front door, which wouldn't open for him. Then he noticed the metal placard to the left, full of names and buttons. He was still searching for Taylor when the front door swung open, revealing a naked matador. That wasn't quite right. Orlando was dressed, but the matador costume was gone. His blue eyes were just as striking without the mask, except now his eyebrows weren't obscured, allowing a greater range of motion. Orlando didn't use the brows to scowl, nor did he raise one in puzzlement. Instead, they crinkled up in the middle like he was pained. Oh, he said, I should have known. Tony invited me over for, Evan began. I know exactly what you're here for, Orlando said, stepping aside and holding the door open for him. It's not like that, Evan protested. I honestly don't care anymore. Are you coming in or not? Not knowing what else to do, Evan stepped inside. Orlando's face grew tighter, his jaw clenching as his head gave a barely perceptible shake. "Are you okay?" Evan asked. "I'm fine. I have a class to get to. Have fun." With that, Orlando walked outside, the door swinging shut behind him. Evan had the strange urge to chase after him, to explain, or maybe apologize, but he really didn't know what he would say. Instead, he turned his attention to the interior, checking each door before proceeding up another flight of stairs. On the third floor, he found the familiar last name of Taylor. He pushed the doorbell, then knocked for good measure. "It's open," a voice shouted from inside. This was crazy. Not only did Evan have the address of an internet celebrity, but now he was being invited to stroll on in. He put his hand on the doorknob and did just that. His first impression was of a completely normal home. He stood in a hallway with a kitchen to his left and a small closet to his right. From ahead came the sounds of a ball game, so he walked toward this, passing a bathroom on his way. A doorway at the end of the hall revealed the edge of an unmade bed, but he ignored it to focus on the living room to the left. The space was average in size and not completely unfamiliar. The computer in one corner was new to Evan, but everything it faced was in the background of most videos Tony made. This included a glass coffee table, 2 side tables with tasteful lamps, and a long couch covered in brown suede. Sitting on this couch, game controller in hand and facing a big screen television, was Tony. Similar to most of his videos, Tony was shirtless. Less typical were the Pokemon-themed pajama bottoms he wore, and the way his hair stuck up like he'd just crawled out of bed. "Hey," Tony said, sparing him a glance before returning his attention to the TV. "You got my message. I wasn't sure if you would." "Yeah, I guess I'm a little early." "Nah, I'm running late. Slept in. Want to play?" Evan glanced at the screen where a virtual baseball game was taking place. "I'm not really a sports guy." "Too bad. Have a seat." He did so. The couch was long enough that Evan didn't have to sit directly next to Tony. He preferred this since it made it easier to sneak peeks at him. Tony didn't have much to say. He focused on his game, tongue sticking out the corner of his mouth. In fact, he didn't seem to care much that he had a guest. Evan tried making conversation a few times. His efforts met only with grunts. He even considered leaving at one point, but was too curious to see what would happen. Something had to happen, right? "I'm getting hungry," he said. Tony glanced over at him, looked him up and down. "Of course. Sorry. Let me grab a quick shower and we'll be on our way." Evan was handed the game controller. He pushed a few buttons until Tony had left the room. Then he paused it and sighed. He listened to the shower hiss, the sloshing sound of water hitting the tiles. Tony began to whistle. The shower went on and on, Evan growing more bored and horny by the minute. He stood, just to stretch his legs, of course, and casually wandered toward the hallway. The bathroom door was open. An invitation? Or just luck? Evan debated internally, lecturing himself for even thinking such a horrible thought. Once he felt thoroughly chastised, he crept down the hall. The bathroom door was wide open. As he peeked around it, he saw the shower curtain was, too, having not been pulled shut fully. The floor was getting wet, but he barely noticed this because the view was so damn fine. Water coursed over Tony's strong shoulders, running down the valley of his back muscles and between his firm ass cheeks. He was rinsing his hair, face raised to the shower head as he drank and spit. Then he spun around, giving Evan an impression of a cock that had to be half hard because it was too long to be soft. He caught Tony's eye before ducking back down the hall. Then he hurried back to the living room, face burning. He should go. He should just leave and never come back because this was too embarrassing. The shower water shut off before he could flee. Soon Tony strolled into the room, wearing a pleased expression. And a towel around his waist, thank God. "Was I taking too long?" he asked innocently. "Yeah," Evan said, stammering a little. I thought you had drowned or something. Really? Tony nodded at Evan's crotch. Looks like I got you all excited. I just knew you'd have a big dick. Those scrubs yesterday could barely conceal it. Evan turned away, walked to one of the windows and looked out, trying to summon thoughts to cool his libido. He waited for Tony to come up behind him, knowing he would either flinch or give in when he felt his touch. Perhaps both. But it didn't happen. Instead, Tony spoke, sounding like he was still standing in the same spot. Too fast for you? I was promised lunch, Evan said with a nervous chuckle. Why buy the cow and all that? Fair enough. I'll be ready in just a minute. Evan kept his attention on the street below, watching two old ladies have a conversation while their small dogs took turns sniffing each other's butts. That was enough to get him out of the mood. Mostly. When Tony came back to the room, he was dressed. This returned an element of mystique to him. Sure, Evan had just seen all Tony had to offer, but the curves of his body being covered by a burnt orange t-shirt and pair of ripped jeans made him want to see what hid below again. I'm freaking starving, Tony said. Let's go. Evan followed him out of the apartment and down the stairs. Should I drive? My car is right over there. Nah, there's a diner around the corner that I love. They make a great triple cheeseburger. I usually get two. Evan laughed. If you stacked them on top of each other, it would be a sextuple burger. Always with the sex talk, Tony said, shooting him a wink. Can't you think of anything else? Says the guy who forgets to close his shower curtain. Hey, I trusted you not to peek. Tony nudged him reassuringly. Across the street, that's the place. They had missed the lunch rush, meaning they were able to get a table and service right away. Tony ordered his 2 burgers, a side of fries, and a malt. Evan opted for a salad, the grease in the air already making his arteries clog. So, how was the rest of the party? Evan asked. Boring, Tony said. I kept wishing you had stuck around. Most people there kept telling me exactly what I wanted to hear. I like that, don't get me wrong, but it gets old. You, on the other hand. Go on, Evan said. Sum me up in one word. Tony rubbed the scruff on his chin a moment. Hesitant. Evan was appalled. Really? I come across like I can't make up my mind? Sort of. Tony shrugged. I'm getting a lot of mixed signals from you. Maybe because I don't get what's going on, Evan said. From watching your videos, I got the impression that you and Orlando are the perfect couple. We are, Tony said. Why would you think otherwise? The paddle boats, the shower a moment ago. Am I crazy, or were both an invitation for a hookup? Tony smiled at the waitress as she set down their plates. Despite being in her 50s, she still blushed. Then Tony popped a fry in his mouth and chewed. He nodded at Evan's salad like he should dig in, so he did. I was hoping to set the record straight, Tony said. I sucked at explaining things last night. Like I said, one too many. Anyway, Orlando and I are happy. The thing is, I'm not the easiest guy to date. I'm needy as hell. And he shouldn't have to deal with that, so I get a little action on the side. I ran into him outside your apartment, Evan said. Tony shrugged. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He knows. Yeah, but he didn't look happy. Tony checked beneath the bun, making sure there weren't any onions as he specified when ordering. Then he added extra ketchup to both burgers, replaced the buns, and took a big bite of one. He chewed happily, making a few appreciative noises. Orlando looked unhappy, Evan repeated, wondering if he hadn't been heard. I don't think he likes you sleeping around. Tony rolled his eyes and swallowed. If he didn't like it, he wouldn't be with me. Besides, he does the same thing. Really? Of course. You've got nothing to worry about. Are you always this tense? No, Evan said. It's just surprising, that's all. You should make a video about it. Tony shook his head. People wouldn't like it. They only want to hear about fairy tale relationships. Orlando and I love each other, and that's all they need to know. If they knew what we do on the side, they would think we don't care about each other. I don't need to be judged like that. This made Evan feel a little guilty. He was beginning to feel old-fashioned, so he searched for a more light-hearted subject. He commented on the food, then the song on the jukebox, before taking inspiration from the videos Tony made. "Hey, where's your dog? I didn't see her at the apartment." "Beanie lives with Orlando," Tony said. "But in the video, you adopted her." "I know, but Beanie got more attached to Orlando, so she stays with him. She's still my dog," Tony chuckled. "We just don't live together." Evan was more surprised that Tony and Orlando didn't live together. In a way, this was the first news that came as a relief. He'd always assumed that they spent every waking and sleeping moment together. Maybe they weren't so serious after all. Except Orlando sure acted like they were. "You really like my videos, huh?" Tony said between bites. "Maybe you should be in one with me." "Really? What would it be about?" Tony looked him over. "About you, the boy wonder, the big mystery. What makes you tick?" "My first interview," Evan said, grinning at the idea. "Want to do a trial run? Hit me with your most burning question." When did you come out?" "When I was 13. I called my grandpa and told him first. I asked him to keep it a secret, but he was near deaf and had this special phone that was really loud. My parents were visiting him at the time, along with my aunt and uncle, so everyone basically heard." "And how did that go?" "They were cool," Evan said. "My dad confided in me that he likes dressing up in women's clothing. I know it's not the same thing as being gay, but somehow it made me feel better." Tony laughed. "That's awesome. When did you get your first boyfriend?" "When I was 18, so it was a long wait. I worked at Walmart stocking shelves. Another guy there always caught my eye before smiling at me. One day I was in the warehouse area and, Evan smiled at the memory. He came right up to me and without saying a word, he kissed me. Afterwards he ran away, but once I caught up with him, I kissed him back." Tony looked amused. "So, you don't always play hard to get." "Who says I'm playing?" Evan asked, not quite seeing the humor. "Did you guys do it right then and there?" "Nope. We went on a date first. Although just to prove I'm not a total prude, we used to meet in one of the changing rooms for a little afternoon delight." Tony smiled appreciatively. "Nice. So what happened to this guy?" "Once we really started talking, we found we didn't have much in common. There weren't any hard feelings. Occasionally, we'd still hook up." "Thank God," Tony said. "I was starting to think you were a lost cause." This wasn't said with any levity, which made Evan feel like he needed to explain himself. "I like sex. Believe me, there are times when I can't get enough. But I know from experience that sex with someone you love is way better than a one-night stand. In my fantasies, I'm with a guy I know, inside and out, someone I can trust, someone I can do completely freaky and filthy things with all night. But those acts aren't nearly as appealing without an emotional connection." Tony's face didn't indicate his reaction to this little speech. After studying Evan a moment, he said, "You love my videos. You like me enough that you wanted my autograph. Do you think you could love me?" "Yeah," Evan said, even though the confession made him feel vulnerable. "Do you love me?" A couple of days ago, he might have answered in the affirmative, but now he felt confused. "I think I love the person in your videos," he said. "Does that make sense?" Tony leaned back and opened his arms. "That's who I am. Maybe it's a little different interacting with me in real time, but the guy in those videos, that's who I am." Evan licked his lips, wanting to trust these words and get carried away in a whirlwind romance, but his stupid brain was insisting he re-examine all the evidence. "Your other burger is getting cold," he said. Tony laughed. "You sure know how to keep a guy on his toes." He didn't seem to mind. Instead, he resumed devouring his food, quizzing Evan on his favorite videos. That was an easy topic. He enjoyed so many of them, like last Christmas when Tony had collected toys for needy children, showing off on camera the huge haul he had gathered. Or the video guest starring his grandma, where Tony blushed as she told embarrassing stories about the trouble he got into as a kid. Or even the video with Orlando when he and Tony took Beanie out to the dog park, them laughing together as she hopped around and made friends with every mutt there. Just talking about all those happy moments made Evan feel better about his obsession. Of course he loved Tony. Maybe it wasn't true love since he was normally just a spectator, but it was a love of sorts. There was nothing wrong with that. Tony certainly seemed to appreciate it. After the meal, they strolled together around the block. Then they headed back to the apartment. "Want to come inside?" Tony asked. "Play a couple rounds of ball?" Evan shook his head. "I don't like sports, remember?" "Oh, right. I wasn't really hoping to play video games. I just wanted to get you on the couch." Evan smiled, glancing toward the front stoop, the place where Orlando had looked so hurt. "Maybe next time." Tony took a step closer. "You're not leaving without a kiss," he said. "I made sure not to have onion breath just for you." If he wasn't so damn handsome, Evan might have been stronger. But alas, he was human. Resisting a simple kiss was asking too much. Making sure not to close his eyes, Evan leaned forward, scarcely believing it when their lips touched. And it felt so wrong. Technically, the kiss was good. Tony tasted fine. He led the way and didn't overwhelm him with his tongue. Evan even liked how his scruff tickled. But something intangible, maybe even mystical, told him this wasn't the right one. The smoking hot guy with the three-legged dog, the cocky, self-assured man who made video lectures about commitment and did good deeds for charity. He wasn't the one. How could that be? Evan pulled back. Tony was grinning and seemed completely satisfied. "What are you doing tomorrow?" he asked. "Working. It's Monday." "What are you doing tonight?" Evan shook his head ruefully. "I'll call you." Tony looked skeptical. That's what they all say. "And do they?" After thinking about it, Tony brightened up. "Yeah, they always call me." "There you go." Evan smiled, said goodbye, and walked to his car. By the time he reached it, Tony had already gone back upstairs. Instead of driving away, Evan allowed himself to remain there, his attention returning repeatedly to the front stoop where he'd had his brief encounter with Orlando. He stared at this spot, not understanding why he felt so unsettled, or why Tony's kiss had left an aftertaste of guilt in his mouth. "The perfect guy," Tony said, expression solemn as he faced the camera, "would have to be a lot of things. Handsome would be nice. Let's get that out of the way. I'd want him to think I was hot, too. Funny is always good. I like a guy who can make me laugh. Romance isn't too important. I just want someone I can hang out with, a friend. Except, of course, when the lights turn off at night." Tony laughed, rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. He froze in that position, a series of little dots chasing each other in a circle. Evan swore, grabbed the mouse, and clicked. Once the resolution was lowered, the video buffered faster and continued playing. Tony unfroze and resumed his speech. "Someone who cares about me and makes me feel special. I want to be his everything. That's what I'll be for him, too. That's what love is, I guess. When a person becomes your entire world and you become theirs, that's love. The good news is," Tony reached for the camera, adjusting it and moving it to the left. There, sitting next to him, was Orlando. His normally tan cheeks were flushed and his blonde hair was in disarray, as if he and Tony had been rolling around in bed together. He must have noticed this on the monitor because he hurried to fix it while Tony continued speaking. "It's my pleasure, my faithful viewers, to introduce you to my new boyfriend. Say hello to Orlando." "Hello," Orlando mumbled. Then he looked over at Tony with a slightly panicked expression. "Let's hope he gets used to the camera," Tony chuckled. "For now, it doesn't really matter." Then he leaned over. Evan used to both love and hate this part of the video. He was jealous of this new person, especially when he had first made his debut. Seeing Tony kiss another person was almost painful. And yet, by concentrating on only half the screen, Evan could imagine those lips working their magic on him. This time, when he watched the video, Evan focused on Orlando. His eyes were misty and half-lidded, and he appeared to be in complete bliss. That Orlando enjoyed the kiss was obvious. Why Evan had not still troubled him. Guilt. Had it doused a bucket of water on the fireworks? If Evan knew for sure that Tony was in an open relationship, he could let go and enjoy himself. And if Orlando's attitude indicated their relationship was crumbling, then maybe Evan had a chance to make his own dream come true. Or maybe, much like television, you couldn't believe everything you saw on YouTube. Either way, he needed more information. For the third time this week, Evan found himself parked in front of a familiar apartment building. Like yesterday evening, he didn't get out of his car. Instead, he sat there, a detective keeping tabs on a suspect. Going to the source wasn't an option because even if he asked Tony straight up, Evan didn't trust his own judgment when confronted by that handsome face. Instead, he hoped to see, well, anything that would give him his answer. Like yesterday, he wouldn't stay more than half an hour because that would be weird. Weirder. But at least Tony's apartment wasn't much of a detour from where Evan worked. He had turned the ignition key and was getting ready to leave when he saw Orlando walking up the sidewalk, carrying a cardboard box. Evan killed the engine and watched as Orlando went up the stairs and paused before the door, leaning the box against it so he could dig in his pockets for the key. The box was tilted dangerously and would surely fall over any second. Stalker boy to the rescue. Evan hopped out of the car and hurried across the street. By the time he made it up the steps, Orlando had his keys out, but the box was slipping. Evan grabbed it, Orlando smiling in relief. This expression soon turned to one of agony. "Back for more?" Orlando asked, mouth tight. "No," Evan said immediately. "I'm not. Can we talk?" Orlando blinked a few times. "You want to talk to me?" "Yeah," Evan said. "Preferably alone." Orlando considered him a moment longer. "I looked you up in one of Tony's yearbooks. You two really did go to school together." Evan tried to smile. "I'm an honest sort of guy." Orlando looked him up and down. "You were pretty chunky." "Chances are I will be again," Evan said easily. "I've got this thing for cupcakes. Can't get enough. Once my metabolism slows down, I'll swell up like a balloon." Orlando seemed momentarily amused. "I know a little bakery that will blow your mind. They might still be open." "Sounds good." "I have to bring this box upstairs first." Orlando unlocked the door and took it from him. "Come on, he's not home. I called before I came over." Evan followed him inside, feeling a little strange when they entered Tony's quiet and unoccupied apartment. He kept his eyes away from the bathroom door where he'd stood and seen. Yeah. Instead, he focused on what Orlando was doing. He had placed the box on the table and grabbed a scrap of paper to write on. His penmanship was large and loopy, making it easy to read. "More headshots for your adoring fans. You'll have to do the envelopes yourself. My workload at school is too much, but each photo is separated by an address label. Just bag them and ship them off." Then he signed his name, the O in Orlando having a loop at the bottom that made it look like a slash running through the letter. Evan stared at this and frowned. "We can just talk here if you want," Orlando said. "Tony won't be back for a while." Evan shook his head. "You promised me cupcakes." "You're buying," Orlando said. "Not me." "Fair enough." They went back outside, walking the first few blocks in awkward silence. Evan knew what he had to say, but couldn't imagine it not resulting in an argument. He tried approaching the subject indirectly. "I really admire the relationship you and Tony have together," he said. "Do you?" Orlando asked. "What exactly do you like about it?" "Your openness with each other." Orlando snorted. "Yes, I can see why you would like how open we are." Evan didn't speak as they waited for a crosswalk signal to change. They were in the middle of the road when he tried again. It's important for couples to talk to each other, to say what they want. Communication is key. You guys seem to have that part down. Personally, I couldn't be in an open relationship. I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. But if you guys figured out what you both want, then that's cool. Orlando glanced over at him, mouth a flat line. Then he nodded and picked up the pace. The bakery was, indeed, open. Orlando must have been a frequent patron there since they knew him by name. Only 3 cupcakes remained, which Evan bought along with 2 bottles of milk. Then he took the lead, walking a little farther to a park he knew of. Sitting down on a bench, he offered Orlando food and drink. Both were declined. "If you're an old-fashioned kind of guy," Orlando asked, "then why are you sleeping with Tony? That's not exactly a traditional courtship." "We're not sleeping together," Evan said. "You two being together is holding me back. I don't feel right about it, but I feel like I shouldn't let it bother me since it's what you've chosen. And no, this isn't the traditional sort of relationship I crave, but we're talking about Tony here." He didn't need to explain. Orlando even smiled. "He's not easy to resist, although you seem to be managing. Now I know why he's been in a bad mood the last couple of days. You might be the first person to ever turn him down." "I haven't even called," Evan said with a little laugh. "That's so insane. I must be stronger than I think." Orlando looked puzzled too, "Especially since you're only holding back because of me. Considering how I treated you at the party, I'm surprised." "All water under the bridge," Evan said. "I'm not usually like that." Orlando studied the park bench, traced his finger along a line of spray paint. His face was more resigned than it was sad. Evan felt bad for him, but decided it was time to pry. "I get the feeling that you aren't happy with the arrangement." Orlando's jaw clenched. "Only one of us is in an open relationship. I know that doesn't make sense. Tony has permission to wander. I don't need to. I'm happy with what I've got. Or at least I used to be. Tony, on the other hand, you wouldn't think someone like him could have self-esteem problems, but he does. He's got this massive hole in his ego, and I tried my best to fill it up with love and admiration, but it wasn't enough. A dog, the most loyal of companions, wasn't enough. All his fans, all the comments and praise on YouTube, or the looks he gets from men and women on the street, none of that is enough." Orlando sighed. When he said he needed a little action on the side occasionally, I agreed. I hated the idea, and we argued and fought, but in the end, I hoped it would be the last little bit he needed to make himself feel better. The sad thing is, I don't think it really makes a difference. "Then why do you keep allowing it?" Evan asked. Orlando laughed bitterly. "Because I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know. I'm a psych major, so maybe I see Tony as a giant puzzle I want to solve?" He shook his head. "No, that's only a small part of the attraction. I feel like I've been in love with him since I saw the first video. He was talking about wanting someone, how he had all this love building up in his chest, just waiting to explode for someone else," Evan finished for him. "That's right." Orlando laughed, for real this time. "You're a fan, how could I forget?" "I guess that's all I am, too. A fan who got lucky." Evan was glad the mood had lightened, but he still had too many unanswered questions. "Tony said that you're both open, that you go outside the relationship, too." "Never," Orlando said. Then his shoulders slumped. "Just once. Tony wanted to have a threesome, and I thought it might be a way to bring him back. I'd let him mess around, but only when we were together. So I tried, and I hated it. That's not what a relationship is to me. I don't have a problem with anyone else living their life that way, but it's not what I dreamed of when I was a kid. As far as I'm concerned, commitment is just another word for love." Evan snapped his fingers. "I knew I wasn't crazy. I remember a video where Tony was talking about commitment, and that's one of the things he said. It totally doesn't mesh with all this open relationship stuff, So I went looking for it the other day, and I deleted it. Orlando watched a hopeful pigeon strut around in front of them and frowned. After the first time I let Tony stray, I wrote him a note. I was hurting, and I wanted to explain why. I hoped I could undo the damage, make him see things my way. Instead, he took my note and used it as a script for one of his videos. Evan's mouth dropped open, a physical representation of the pit that had also opened in his stomach. That's horrible. Orlando nodded. Yeah, it is. At first I thought he had done it to show he understood and agreed. But really I think he's willing to do anything to make strangers love him. It's the people who already love him that get the short end of the stick. Evan hunched over, stared unseeing at the leaf-covered ground. The autographed photos. You're the one signing them all. Yeah, Orlando sighed. My fault, since the photos were my idea. Yet another attempt to show Tony how loved he is. How many people in real life can get paid for signing a photo? So it's all fake, Evan murmured. The dog was your idea, and you take care of it. You're the one making time for the fans. He even stole your words. Next, you're going to tell me that you dressed up as his grandma for that one video. Orlando laughed. No, but I was Tony's body double for the swimming pool video. He flexed a muscle that was barely there before growing serious again. It's not all fake. Those first videos, the one where he was so desperate for someone to love, I still believe them. I've seen glimpses of that Tony. Not often and not for long, but enough to keep me hanging on. I'm sorry, Evan said. Orlando shrugged. It's my choice and my fault. I don't know about that last bit, Evan said, but there's something else I'm sorry for. I kissed Tony the other day. It was horrible because all I could think about was how hurt you looked earlier in the day. Nothing else happened, I swear, but I wish I could take it back. Orlando nodded. A kiss is pretty innocent compared to some of the stories Tony tells me. At least you cared enough to regret it, although I'm surprised you didn't enjoy it. So am I, Evan said, so earnestly that they both laughed. I appreciate you letting me vent, Orlando said. And as nice as this talk has been, I really have to get home. I have a dog to feed. Beanie, Evan said excitedly. God, I don't know if I'll ever be able to watch Tony's videos again, but I'm still a fan of that dog. She should get her own channel. Orlando smiled. Do you want to meet her? Are you kidding? Totally. Then let's go. Orlando pretended to hesitate. Although this time, try to keep your tongue away from my loved ones. Orlando's apartment was on a much less glamorous side of town. When they entered directly into the living room, it became obvious that it was also smaller than Tony's home. Considering he was still in college, Orlando being able to afford to live on his own was impressive enough. Not that he didn't have a roommate. A sleek, gray dog ran up to Orlando, thin tail wagging in excitement. Her right front leg was missing, but this didn't hinder her as she hopped around in excitement. Evan had seen in videos how she could still bolt across a park at a lightning speed worthy of her greyhound breed. Finished greeting her owner, the dog's ears perked up in curiosity. Hi, Beanie, Evan said. The dog walked over to him and sat on her haunches, looking up in anticipation. She expects people to come down to her level, Orlando said, shaking his head. Beanie, stop being silly. He's not going to... Oh. Evan had already plopped down on the floor, sitting cross-legged. Beanie seemed pleased by this, stretching her neck forward to smell his hair and face. Then she opened her mouth and panted, treating him to a blast of dog breath. Evan groaned and waved a hand to clear the air before laughing. Sorry, Orlando said. I talked to the vet about that, and he told me to brush her teeth. I haven't tried yet, mostly because I only have one toothbrush. You don't want to share? Evan joked. It's fine, really. The positive association almost makes it a good smell. Kind of like the zoo. You mean that musky smell? Orlando nodded. I get that. I love animals, and even their stink reminds me of that. Do you have any pets? No, Evan said, rubbing the belly Beanie had rolled over to offer him. I had a cat and, I'm not ready to move on yet. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks, but it's been a while. Most people would have gotten over it by now. Orlando considered him a moment. Do you want something to drink? I have coffee. Or tap water. I still have milk, Evan said. Shouldn't we finally break out these cupcakes? We even have an extra one for Beanie. Orlando laughed. Okay, but she can't have the frosting. That's way too much sugar. I'm not even sure it's fit for human consumption. Evan made himself at home in the kitchen, scraping the frosting off one and into the sink while Orlando got plates. The cupcakes didn't look special in any way, but when Evan sat on the couch and took a bite, he started making noises pretty similar to someone having an orgasm. Told you they were good, Orlando said. I normally don't let myself eat them, but it's been one of those weeks. Sorry, Evan said. I guess that's my fault. Not entirely, Orlando said with good humor. My workload at school has been piling up. I'm totally behind, and if I don't catch up soon, I'll be in serious trouble. There's also that handsome guy who's been hanging around my boyfriend, not to mention all the YouTube stuff. Speaking of which, Orlando stood and went to his computer to check on something. Evan surveyed the apartment while he did. The style was similar to Tony's home. Warm, earthy colors and cheap but attractive decorations placed among a few older pieces of furniture, like the pockmarked wooden coffee table. Maybe interior design was something Orlando and Tony had in common. Or more likely, Orlando had decorated Tony's place for him. Speak of the devil, a snippet of Tony's voice filled the room before it was cut short. Sorry, Orlando said. Just checking some video comments. There's been a group of trolls trying to stir everyone up. I keep having to ban them. Evan stood and walked over to the little desk against one wall, watching while Orlando perused the responses left to different videos. In the list were a few he didn't recognize. Cooking with Chef Tony? Evan said, reading one of the titles. That one's going live tomorrow, Orlando said. He makes pasta and does this horrible Italian accent the entire time. People are gonna love it. Yep. Evan pointed. What's that one there? One we recorded while drunk. We agreed not to publish it. Tony wanted to. He thought it was funny until I pointed out he has a booger in his nose. Evan laughed. Hey, do you still have that one on commitment? You said you deleted it, but videos can be set to private, right? Orlando nodded. Yeah, I kept it. He clicked a few times. Then Tony's shining eyes appeared on screen, the video already a couple minutes in. It's about protecting someone, he was saying. When I'm with a person and I give them my heart, I feel more vulnerable than ever. That's why I need a sense of security. Not knowing who they are with or if someone else might steal them away. Just the idea of that hurts. I don't know why it does. I know I should probably just have faith in the power of love, but I can't. Being in love is the most wonderful feeling in the world, but sometimes it's downright terrifying. That's why people make promises to each other. That's why they... Orlando stopped the video. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to watch that one. The letter I wrote addressed him directly, so he kind of changed it, but you get the gist. It's beautiful, Evan said. Do you still have the letter somewhere? Tony does, yeah. You should take it back. Make your own video where you read it out loud. Hey, you should start your own channel. Not a chance. Orlando shook his head. I've never been comfortable in front of the camera. The only reason you ever see me is because Tony drags me on screen, and he only does that because it makes the number of views go up. Just more evidence that you should be making your own videos. It has more to do with two guys being on cam together. Orlando clicked shut the browser window. I hate to be rude, but I really should start studying. I have work in the morning, too. Sorry, Evan said. I didn't mean to impose. Not at all, Orlando said, standing. It was fun. If you ever want to hang out again, you've got my username, right? Yeah, Evan said. I still remember when you changed it to Beanie's Baby. I thought it was annoying at the time. And sort of cute. Orlando laughed. Now that you've met her, can you blame me? Of course not. Evan walked over to say goodbye to the dog. He honestly didn't expect to see her ever again. As likable as Orlando had turned out to be, remaining in his and Tony's life would only cause more problems. After a pat on the head for one of them, and a civilized handshake for the other, Evan took his leave and headed home. So basically, the guy I had a crush on doesn't exist. Julie, sitting next to him on the couch, patted his hand. Sorry, darling. The logical part of me feels relieved, since this means the end of an unhealthy obsession. The friend part of me sympathizes. You thought you found a guy who had it all. The face, the pecs, and from what you saw in the shower, the sausage. It sure was swinging back and forth, Evan said with a wistful sigh. But honestly, if all I cared about was a nice body and a big dick, I'd content myself with porn. More than I do already, at least. Here's to porn, Julie said, raising her beer and toast. Evan clinked bottles with her, noticing she was already one ahead. He chugged the rest of his down in an effort to catch up. Ugh, he said after a gasp. What really depresses me is how Tony's heart wasn't real. I love the idea of being with a sweet guy who values love more than anything. The kind of guy with enough empathy to take in a three-legged dog instead of an adorable puppy. Someone who needs to give love as much as he gets it in return. Like Orlando, Julie said. Yeah, exactly. Evan blinked. Wait, what? Orlando, Julie repeated. He's basically the one who made Tony seem so kind. He's like the super nice puppet master behind the scenes, pulling the pink fluffy strings. That big heart you adored is real. It's just in the wrong body. I'm assuming this Orlando guy is ugly? No, Evan said. I mean, he's got this little button nose that's always a little red, like he's cold. But I like it. Great eyes, too. They're really sympathetic. At least when he's not glaring at me for trying to steal his man. Balding? Julie asked. Nope. Medium-length blonde hair covers his ears a little, which makes me want to nibble them. Julie patted her flat stomach. He must have a gut. College boys love to drink. His body looked nice enough to me. He's no Tony, but I caught myself checking him out more than once. Suddenly, Julie looked a lot shrewder than she had a second ago. So basically, you found your dream guy, just in a different but still acceptably attractive body. Right. Evan sat up straight, goosebumps chasing over his skin. Oh, man! I am so blind! That's why you've got me. Evan slumped back into the couch. Orlando is already taken. Duh. He's with Tony. And you can't compete with a self-centered, egotistical jerk who can't keep his dick in his pants. A jerk who is really handsome, Evan said. This Orlando guy doesn't strike me as being that superficial. Surely there has to be another reason why he's with Tony. Evan thought about it. For the same reason I wanted to be with him. Orlando caught a glimpse of something in that one video I showed you. Do you remember? We could watch it again. No, Julie said firmly. If you still want a shot at your dream guy, it's time to get your priorities straight. Meaning, it's time to beat Tony at his own game. I've never felt complete. Evan stared into the impassive lens of the camera, wishing he was talking to a real person instead. Now he wished he hadn't kicked Julie out of the room, but she kept insisting he take off his shirt. He hadn't, because recording this video wasn't about sex appeal. Not entirely. Maybe that's unhealthy to admit, he continued. It's not that I don't love myself or that I'm not a happy person when I'm alone. I do okay, for the most part. It's just that I've always wanted someone in my life. When I was a little boy, I used to admire my parents' marriage, especially when they forgot I was in the room. They would have these simple little conversations together or would laugh at inside jokes. I even thought it was cool that they shared the same bed, since it meant they didn't have to worry about any monsters lurking in dark corners. Evan chuckled, feeling a little more comfortable. When I got older and after I came out, I waited. With the hardest step out of the way, I figured it was only a matter of time before Prince Charming came to claim my heart. When that didn't happen, I went looking. After a couple of bad dates, I thought I found the right guy. This happened a few times, actually, but none of my relationships lasted. Each time I would see potential and get hopeful, but after really getting to know the guy, we'd be incompatible for one reason or another, and I would move on. Evan cleared his throat, pulse quickening. Moving on is crucial. You can spend your entire life waiting for the wrong person to become the guy of your dreams. Sometimes it's good to be patient or to help the other person along. But when you keep trying and things only get worse, it's time to go. When you spend more time being hurt than you do feeling loved, it's definitely time to cut your losses. That might sound sad, but freeing yourself means getting another chance to meet the right guy. I know this can seem like an impossible quest, or sometimes it's more like a war, a really lonely one, where it feels like you're the only one fighting. I've almost given up a few times myself, but the thing is, Evan swallowed, licked his lips, and stared hard into the camera. The thing is, I think I finally found the right guy. Ironically, I almost passed him by. I've been looking so hard that I almost didn't see the obvious. He was right there all along, waiting on the sidelines, which is wrong because he's the one who deserves to be a star. He's amazing, and I might not have a chance with him. But if I do, I want him to know that I'm interested. I'll do my best to be careful with your heart. I'll make sure you feel loved. And most of all, I'll appreciate you for who you are. And I'll respect you. When's the last time you felt respected? But before any of this can happen, you have to make a decision. I know it won't be easy, but when you do decide, and if I'm lucky enough, well, you know where to find me. Evan practically gasped from being out of breath. His chest heaved a few times before he stopped the recording. He wouldn't overthink it or rewatch the video. It was being published right now for the whole world to see. Once it was, he'd send a link to a user called Beanie's Baby. Then Evan would panic nonstop until he got a response. Day 3. 26 views. This meant he was averaging almost 9 views a day. Of course, 10 of those were probably Julie, who couldn't stop raving about the video. "It's really good," she kept reassuring him. "Even if people don't know the background story, the idea of you addressing your dream guy is just so romantic." Evan thanked her each time, but he obviously wasn't going viral. When Tony published a video, he got thousands of views in the first day, not to mention all the subscribers he had. Evan still didn't have one. Not even Julie had thought to do so. Maybe Evan should have asked his viewers to do what so many YouTube stars did. Be sure to like and subscribe. In a way, that's what the video was all about. Evan hoped Orlando liked him, and if he did, maybe he'd sign up for regular installments. Phone calls, dates, first kisses, and sleepovers. Evan sighed at the idea. Then he went back to panicking. By day 5, his heart ceased beating fast and began to feel heavy instead. His views seemed to have trickled to a stop. When he trudged home from work that night, he didn't expect good news, like his first subscriber, or the message in his inbox from the very same person. Palms sweating, he clicked to open the message and read it. "Greetings from your newest subscriber. I really enjoyed your big debut. It's been a long time since a video has made me think, or inspired me, or given me hope. There was one such video that used to be special, but I think I got dazzled by the showy presentation rather than the content. A shame, since the experience left me shaken, but it's strange how one thing can lead to another. Speaking of which, this night will lead to an early morning shift at my job. You should stop by sometime. We make the most amazing cupcakes. See you around, Orlando." Evan stared at the screen. This was good, right? Orlando wanted to see him, and to think he worked at that bakery, and yet inviting someone to swing by your workplace wasn't exactly a candlelit dinner. Regardless, Orlando's willingness to meet again was a good sign. At the very least, Evan was eager to reevaluate his feelings. The best way to do that was to see Orlando again, even if it did mean waking up at the crack of dawn, all in the name of love. Orlando wasn't a glorious sight. The morning sun didn't shine through the bakery window, catching his blonde hair, nor was he smiling as he handed an old lady a bag of donuts. He didn't ask her about her grandkids, or even wait for her to get out of the way before addressing the next customer. Once they too had been served, Orlando rubbed his weary face, chugged down the remainder of his coffee, and looked bleary-eyed out the window. That's when he noticed Evan standing outside watching him. Then Orlando brightened up and smiled. He turned to say something to a coworker, his mouth moving like in a silent film, before he hurried outside to where Evan was waiting. "Fresh air," Orlando said, sucking it in. "I don't suppose you're here to tell me you're rich and want to support a poor, tired college boy." "Sorry," Evan said. "I'm still paying off my student loan." Orlando groaned. "When will it all end?" "Hopefully not just yet," Evan said meaningfully. That he was testing the waters didn't go unnoticed. Orlando searched his eyes with a subtle smile. "Did you see Tony's latest video?" Tony. Not the name Evan wanted to hear right now. "Nope, I unsubscribed." "You did?" Orlando looked impressed. "Wow, well, you have to see this one. Or clip, at least." He pulled out his phone and tapped it a few times. Then he leaned in close so Evan could see. Evan didn't notice the screen at first because he was taking in Orlando's scent. Freshly baked bread, pastry dough, and a hint of frosting. Orlando smelled like the best breakfast in the world. He was wondering if his skin would taste good, too, when Tony's voice started blaring from the phone. "And that's why relationships suck," he was saying, cheeks just as red as his eyes. Had he been crying? "What's the point in giving someone your heart when all they'll do is stomp all over it? I didn't sign up for this whole love thing just to get hurt. I don't deserve to be treated this way. Some people don't realize how good they've got it. Am I right?" Tony sniffed, staring off into the distance. Then he glanced around the room as if looking for something to say, but it was obvious his muse was no longer there. "So anyway," he tried. Like and subscribe, I guess. Peace." The video ended, but only after Tony glowered into the camera a moment longer. "Ouch," Evan said. "So you broke it off?" Orlando nodded, looking vulnerable. "Did you really mean all those things you said?" "Trust issues already?" Evan teased softly. "I've been through the ringer. I'm damaged goods." "You're wonderful," Evan said. "There's nothing wrong with you." Orlando smiled, but he shook his head. "I mean it. My relationship with Tony didn't do me any favors. Leaving him felt liberating, but it also hurt. I still need to recover from it all and find my feet again." "You need time," Evan said. "Right." Orlando searched his face. "I like you, and I want to get to know you better, but I also want to take things slow." "No problem. Can we still hang out? Maybe meet up tonight and take Beanie for a walk?" "Yeah," Orlando said. "She'd love that. So would I." "Okay," Evan said, a goofy smile betraying just how happy he was. "And another thing," Orlando bit his lip. "I really did like your video, but do you think you're going to keep making them?" Evan laughed. "Worried I'm going to turn into another Tony Taylor? Don't. I haven't exactly amassed a large following. In fact, I think I'll make my channel private. I'll keep my one subscriber, though, and if I make more videos, they'll be for his eyes only." "That's sweet," Orlando said. "Or hot, depending on what you mean." "Maybe a little of both," Evan said with a chuckle. "So I'll see you tonight?" "Definitely." "Okay." Evan smiled at him a moment longer, then turned to walk down the sidewalk. He only made it 2 steps before someone grabbed his arm and swung him around. "I didn't mean that slow," Orlando said. Before Evan knew what was happening, lips were pressed against his own. A split second later, his muscles relaxed and he reached out to bring Orlando close. He did indeed taste wonderful, like the best thing that had ever happened to him. Then Orlando pulled away, walking backward toward the bakery with a dreamy expression. Evan imagined it matched his own. What a strange place for it all to begin. An empty sidewalk in Kansas City on a cool autumn morning. They were facing each other from a distance like 2 men ready for a gunfight, but only the stirring of love filled their hearts. When their big showdown came, it would be filled with laughter and affection, enough so that they'd never have to fight a lonely war again.
2 young men discover what it means to be friends, lovers, and sometimes even enemies in Something Like Summer. Each Something Like book follows a different LGBTQ character on their quest for love. Central to the plot is the troubled relationship between Ben and Tim, former high school sweethearts who continue to meet over the years, their chemistry changing with each encounter. Surrounding them are a wealth of friends and enemies, each with their own story, resulting in an immersive universe filled with first times and second chances. While the series doesn't shy away from intimate details, it also focuses deeply on emotion, promising an experience that will stay with you long after the final page is turned. Available as an audiobook, ebook, or paperback at your favorite retailer. When a young man is swept back in time to the 1950s, he must decide if he wants to return home or stay with the special guy he falls in love with while there, in, out of time, into you. Available as an audiobook, ebook, or paperback at your favorite retailer.